Good afternoon, Ms. Smith. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for taking some time out of your busy schedule so I could interview you. I think that this is going to be very helpful for the students that watch this and can kind of understand a kind of a career path they want to go on if they want to go in education. So to get started, what motivated you to pursue this career path that you're on now?
I have been in education now for 15 years. When I was in middle school, I had a guidance counselor that was really impactful for me. She helped me through a lot of things that middle schoolers go through. So when I went to undergrad, I really thought I was going to be a guidance counselor. That's what I started, majored in psychology. So I started down that path. About halfway through undergrad, I decided this wasn't really for me. And I switched lanes and went into teaching. I've always wanted to be somebody who made an impact in other people's lives. Educators run in my family. My dad's an educator. My grandparents were educators in different fields, not just always in the classroom. So that was kind of something that always stuck out to me as a possible career path. I um, I truly believe that education opens up doors for all kinds of jobs and careers. Like I said, not just in the classroom, but you could be an educator that's teaching other people how to do your whatever job that is. So I've loved school. I love learning. I've always been like a lifetime learner. And being an educator kind of helps me do that across the board every single day.
Good. Did you mention you were doing special education? Was that what it was that you also worked in
Oh
that
yes,
field
so
also?
I'm a special educator, and there are no special educators in my family. I didn't have any experience in special education. When I was applying for jobs within the county, I applied for a special education job. I ended up getting a job in a pre-K autism program, working with children who were 3 to 5 years old on autism spectrum, kind of nonverbal, no communication skills. So that opened my eyes to special education, and I haven't worked in any other field in education besides special education. I'm not doing that now currently, but that's where it started, and it really just kind of fell in my lap. I wasn't expecting to be a special educator. I kind of thought I would be a kindergarten teacher or something, fun and you get to play with kids, but that's not where I ended up, and I'm happy for it.
Anything about special education that kind of sticks out to you?
What I love most about special education, especially where I am now in the high school setting, I have kids who are brilliant. I joke around that they're smarter than me sometimes, but they have social and emotional behaviors that kind of impact their learning. They're in environments where the social anxiety kind of takes over and they're unable to be in larger classrooms. And to see those students that I have grow from that ninth grader that's afraid to leave our classrooms to walking across the stage at graduation, it just kind of makes your heart sing. It's one of those feelings that it's really hard to describe, but that's the special education that I love. It's not just IEPs and paperwork and all of that. It's really getting to see the growth and development of young adults.
Right. Any difficulties that you find in special education that you've had to work through? I know it's not one of the questions I'm gonna ask you, but I just kind of, being in special education myself, I just want to know the kind of difficulties that you kind of came across that, that are prevalent to you today that you think about.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that I come across as a difficulty is the misunderstanding and misrepresentation of my students. I think a lot of times I'll have a caseload of students and I'll introduce myself as their case manager, and I'll have even colleagues of my own to this day that will just kind of shy away from what special education is because they don't understand it. They don't understand that they just maybe need a little bit more help or a little bit more time on an assignment. They have this preconceived notion about what kids with special needs are, and put that onto every single student. And what I love, and I even tell my students this every day, that what I love most about special education is it's individualized education. So every single one of them is different. Every way that I approach every single one of them is different. So I think one of the difficulties that I've struggled with the most is having other people understand that what worked for a student that you had 10 years ago isn't going to work for the students that you have now.
And that brings me to my next question. Have you pursued any additional certifications or professional development opportunities since you're starting your educational journey?
Yeah, sure. So let's backtrack a little bit. As I stated before, I was a paraeducator when I first started working in the county. And as a paraeducator, you're basically a teacher's assistant. You do what the teacher says, you implement behavior plans, you take data, you do a lot of the note taking for the teachers. I had some really great colleagues that pushed me to become a teacher. So the first step in pursuing that was to get certified. Like I said before, I was in preschool. I had to get certified to teach in high school because it's two different certifications. So that was the first step in advancing. The next thing that I'm doing and I'm currently pursuing is my master's in special education.
Nice.
Having my master's in special education will not only seal the deal on my special education certification, but it kind of just gives me another like check mark. And then I think long-term goals, I do want to pursue my admin certificate so that I could be an administrator. Having special education background as an administrator is really, really cool and really important. Not a lot of administrators have that special education background to understand the full student. We have all kinds of students in schools, but being an administrator who has special education background, you really get to know what types of students are in your building.
So as administrator, is that like principal, vice principal, something like that?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. All right. And you feel like at that role, you could help in all aspects of the school, because I think for everybody, they need somebody who has that background, because every student has, something going on,
Right. Yeah, for sure. I think that I would, like I said, I want to be somebody who's influential and impactful. And I think eventually one day that might take me outside of the classroom. And that's the next step.
And outside the classroom, do you feel that's something that you want to do? Or, I mean, you said it's the next step, but at this point right now, it seems like you're pretty hands-on with what you're doing right now, and you enjoy the everyday working with the students. Am I
I
wrong?
do. I do. I am nowhere close to ready to leave the classroom. I've had administrators ask me if I have, it's called our admin one certificate. And I'm not there yet. I'm not ready to leave what I love doing, which is teaching every single day. I'm not ready to leave that.
Mm, that's amazing. And I'm sure you've had some pretty good colleagues that you work with too as well, don't you?
Yeah, for sure.
Good. Um, how do you prioritize tasks and manage your workload effectively? Yeah, that's just pretty much the question.
Yeah.
Your
I
priorities and your tasks. Yeah.
I am a list maker. I have a planner that I write down every single day what I have to do. I have my phone calendar. I am the make a list, check it off, pen and paper type person so that it helps me stay organized. When I make lists and I'm organized, I feel like I'm better able to help and serve my students and their families. If I forget a task that I need to do because I haven't written it down, it's disorganizing and it kind of stresses me out a little bit. So I make lists. I use my planner. I check it daily. That's the first thing that I do every morning when I come into work. I open up my planner and funny story, I actually forgot my planner one day. It was after a break and I forgot my planner and I had somebody at home. I said, you need to take a picture of today and send it to me because I really need to know like what's going on today, what meetings I have, what things I need to do to kind of set myself up for success for the day. So I prioritize tasks on my to-do list by most important, what's most important, things that need to get done first. In special education, we have timelines for everything. We have 5 days to get meeting notes out, all kinds of things. So I have to prioritize those types of things. I have in order from most important to least important, the things that maybe don't need to be done this week, but I'm trying to get ahead. I'll put those at the bottom of my list and that'll carry over into the next week. So making lists, staying organized, I would say, are my number one and number two ways that I prioritize tasks.
And I think even with this, the type of students that you work with, kind of touch on how important the schedule is for them and the daily, make sure that everything's maybe not the same, but they know what's going to happen next, and that kind of suppress a lot of the anxiety that they have.
Oh yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I joke about is that my day to day is the same because it has to be. Like I have to have that kind of rigid schedule because of the expectations that my students have. And if there's changes in schedules, even something like in high school when we have an early release, that change in a schedule can cause anxiety to go through the roof. So having schedules and lists and notes and things that stay the same across the board really helps my population of students. And knowing that is really kind of key to being a good educator.
Do you feel like do you feel like in this field, it even for you and maybe your strengths or whatever your weaknesses are, did you feel like it touches on a lot of your personality or even your strengths and your weaknesses that you're going to have to like, oh, I got to be better at this or I got to be better at that. Can you kind of touch on that as well?
Yeah, so I think that knowing what kind of makes other people tick has made me be more aware of not just myself, but my surroundings. I think that um, before I came in, I was an educator. I worked in restaurants, and I used to say everyone needs to work in a restaurant or everyone needs to work in retail because you really learn
Mhm.
a lot about people when you're forced to work around other people. What I've learned as an educator about students is that we are teaching them how to be people, right? We're
Mhm.
teaching them how to make lists and we're teaching them how to do all of these things that they're going to need later on in life, and they're teenagers, so a lot of times they don't want to hear it, but that's what we're here for. And I've learned that as an educator, my own habits and my own behaviors are kind of like on display at all times. Like
Right.
I don't get a second to have like a bad day or a bad moment because my students will call me out on it.
Mhm. Do you have a story about that? Any of those moments?
Actually, yeah. So this year I had a ninth grade student who I don't know. I guess I was just having a bad day. It was just one of those days. And the first thing he said to me was like, "Miss Smith, are you good?" I was like, "What do you mean?" He was
Wow.
like, "I can just tell your energy's different today." And that's when I kind of knew. I was like, "Oh, you got to snap out of it because if he can tell, that means everyone else can tell. That means it's affecting how I'm doing my day to day. Like my daily is affected." So, yeah, that's easiest way is my students will call me out. If I'm not on 10, they'll call me out.
And even with the population that you work with, do you feel like once you gain their trust and
Mm.
because of every day becoming the same thing every day, do you feel like the flow of your educational what do you call it, educational experience with them becomes broader, becomes bigger, and like you feel like you
Yeah.
can do different things because now the trust factor is kicking. Now they're going to sit there and listen to you more. Now they're going to be more engrossed into your lesson plans. Can you kind of touch on that as well?
Yeah, I recently heard a quote or something that if a student doesn't trust you and if they don't believe you, the things that you say, they're not going to learn from you. And I that is like pedagogy to 100. If I don't have the trust of my students, and it takes time to build that trust, but if I don't have that trust and that understanding and mutual respect, there's no learning happening. And it's not just about A's and B's and letter grades, but if we're not able to connect on a level that's more than just what's on the paper or what's in the book. I'm an English teacher, so whatever we're reading, if we're not
Mhm.
able to connect on a personal level with that mutual respect, then they're not going to learn from me and they're not going to want to be in my class. Nobody likes English to begin with. So, so you're not going to want to learn from me if we don't have that same mutual respect and trust. I learned that very early on into teaching high schoolers because they see right through you. If you're
Oh,
fake, they know it.
100%. They're gonna know, especially the population you work with, because they vibe on energy. They pay
Yeah,
attention to how you walk in the door, what you're wearing, how your hair is
everything.
done.
Yep.
Everything matters to them. And that kind of like what you're beginning to think, what motivated you to pursue this path, and it's your passion for these kids is so important. It makes when you come in and you're passionate about it, that's free flowing, that comes out, that allows these kids to see the person that you are.
For
And
sure.
that's really important. Um, okay, let's another question for you. Can you discuss a time when you had to adapt, sorry, to a significant change in your work environment or role? I think we kind of touched on that, but yeah, just
We
kind of
did.
tell
We
us about
did,
it.
but this is the thing about education is this happens a lot. So last year, like last school year, we were facing this whole budget cut crisis, and the department that I was in, there was a whole teacher position that was cut. So I was kind of told at the last minute, had to scramble. I was applying for new positions, thinking about whether or not I was going to leave that school. Luckily, a position opened up within the building that I was in, so I didn't have to leave the school. But the only teaching experience that I've had thus far was teaching in what we call a self-contained class, where the maximum amount of students that I had was maybe 13 or 14 students. So I went from having to teach 13 or 14 students to being in a co-taught class with another
Mm,
teacher of 25 to 30 students.
mm,
Not something that I've ever experienced before. And not only that, but I had students that I was still supporting as the special educator that I didn't know. Um, we talked about building trust and building respect, and it's, for me, it was a really scary thing to have to go from the small little bubble to like the big fish world and learning new students. Most of them were seniors this year. I didn't know them. They had been at the school for the last 4 years, and it was just having to kind of grind through and make those connections really early on in the school year. That was recently this school year. So I had to kind of swerve and learn a new teaching style. I wasn't used to being co-teaching with someone else and not
mhm,
having my own say in what we were doing on the day to day. Like having to collaborate with another team member was something that, again, I wasn't used to. So those kinds of things were challenging for me, just because it was change, and change is always something that challenges people.
mm. And in that, let me ask you this question also. I know with COVID 2020, were you
Right.
teaching at that time?
I was teaching
So so
online.
so explain to me that the transition that you kind of had, because we're talking about adapting to a significant change. How did you
Yeah.
adapt, especially when you're working with this population, from them being able to see you online to in person? What was the how did you adapt to that?
Well, that was first twofold. That was when I came became a teacher. So I was
Mhm,
paraeducator. COVID year 2020 was my first year as an actual teacher, my own
mhm,
classrooms, my own grade book. So that was change number one. And then I was online, had no idea what I was doing. None of us did. We were just trying to figure it all out. Like, how do you teach and how do you engage and how do you keep kids interested when they're sitting behind computer screens at their homes and there's a TV behind them and you can tell that they're not listening. So that was one of the most challenging years in my career, even as a special educator, paraeducator, to teaching. 2020 was kind of one of the hardest years I've had as an educator, and that challenge in itself kind of made everybody, I think, a better teacher. We had to find ways and get creative and find ways to be engaging and find ways to get kids up and out of their seats and find ways to get them to turn their cameras on. Even again, I talked about
mm,
the student population that I have. Like, you think anxiety is crazy when you're sitting in a room, but anxiety with a camera staring at your face, they were not about it. So getting ways, like being creative, getting ways for them to just turn their camera on. I would say, hey, can you turn your camera on for 5 minutes? We can go to a breakout room and it can be just me and you. Just things like that. I had to get creative with my student population.
and when you came back, were they finding it hard to engage with you without the computers? Was it something that they were like, oh, we're so used to just seeing you on the screen. Now we're seeing you in person. How was that transition?
Yeah, I got a lot of, wow, you're a lot shorter than I thought. Like I got a lot of that when we came back in person. Um, and it was also, I think a lot of students struggled with how to interact with people again. They were used to being behind computer screens. And that was, again, was another challenge when we came back into the building. probably like 2 or 3 weeks of like community building stuff, like getting you up and out of your seat. And this is, we're not teaching, we're not learning today. I'm just getting to know you again. It kind of felt like kindergarten all over again, where like you're learning the ways of school all over again. So
That's really interesting. I didn't think about that. That's a good, you probably did a lot of outdoor activities, taking walks, talking,
yeah,
just being able to just interact with people again, because I'm sure the threat of, the whole virus and everything was still, a part of the society for a little while, wearing masks and stuff. And
yeah.
yeah, so I think having those interactions probably were a lot tough, were really tough. Did you manage in those situations where did you have a lot of conflict between the students, or was it pretty easy going at that time? I know them seeing new people or seeing people in person, where there's any lot of conflict you had to deal with at all?
Um, I don't, not conflicts.
Mhm.
Everyone hated wearing a mask. So
Yeah.
there was always the you have to wear your mask conversation. Everyone hated, like, when we first came back in the building, we had our desks 4, 5, 6 feet apart. Like, that was weird. So we weren't allowed to do group things. But I wouldn't call those conflicts. They were challenges. We overcame them.
And see, that's exactly the question of challenges that you were able to overcome, which is, I appreciate that. I think that's probably was the toughest part of education. And I love to hear how
Mhm.
teachers dealt with that. As a parent, I had to deal with it. And having a kindergartner or first grader sit in front of a screen all day, that's
No,
not the
it wasn't
ideal
fun.
of first grade or second grade. I mean, all of first grade and the whole second grade, we had to deal
Yeah.
with that. So
Yep.
that was pretty interesting. Okay, as we're wrapping up, what next steps are you looking forward to taking in your professional career? Basically, I think we kind of touched on it before, but what other goals in your professional career do you see on the horizon for you? Um, Go ahead.
Yeah, I have this, I don't even want to call it an ick, but I kind of feel that public education is lacking in preparing our students for whatever comes next for them. So I kind of feel like I've taken it on as my personal challenge to bring back what people love about public education, where it's free and it's appropriate and it provides a space where students are prepared for whatever comes next for them. And as a high school teacher, and I see kids walk across the stage and earn these diplomas, I kind of want like, my personal mission is for each student's life that I touch is to know that they are prepared for whatever it is that they're doing next. If they're
Mhm.
going to college, if they're going right into the workforce, if they're going to the military, I want to know that I had some kind of impact in their lives so that they're prepared for that. And I feel that um, it's my job to push them to want to make it whatever it is that they want to do. It's my job to push them so that they get there and they're like, you know what, Miss Smith was right. It's not easy out here. It's hard, but I'm prepared and I'm able to handle kind of whatever life's going to throw at me.
Do you feel like in this capacity for what you're reaching for the goals that you want to achieve, do you try to help them to see goals for themselves in the future as well and the path they got to take to get to those goals?
For sure. I give them that kind of like tough love
Mhm.
where I'll tell them, like, it's not easy out here. This is the easiest it's going to get for you. We don't have 50% rules in the real world. Like, I can't pay 50% of my bills. These are conversations that I have with my students, like, that the real world, it gets real. And those are the types of things that I need them to know. And if they don't learn anything from me, again, I'm an English teacher. If you don't ever learn anything English related from me, I hope that you learn that you are prepared and able to stand up on your own 2 feet. And again, with my student population, I like to teach them and tell them that they're more than their disability. They kind of default to, oh, well, I have this or I have that, or this is why this. And I'm like, I want them to know that they can kind of, you can go above that. Like, that's just a label, right? We don't need to like put ourselves and confine ourselves to whatever our label is.
And 50% and people who see this may not even know what that even means. And that's
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 true.
the
That's
that's
true.
the that's the wild thing about it is like we don't have people who understand the real world doesn't give you 50%.
Yeah.
And you have to explain that to these kids that that doesn't happen
Yeah.
outside of this special place that you're in called a school,
Right.
whose desire is to give you the best education that you can. Do you sometimes have an issue with that, or something that you feel like, is it a disservice to the kids, or do you feel like it's helping some kids? Like, what do
No,
you think
I
about
think it's an absolute disservice to our students to give them credit for something that they haven't done.
that?
Where in the real world can I get credit for something that I don't do?
Oh,
Right? It's an absolute disservice. And then again, if you're going on to higher education, imagine going to your college professor and being like, "Hey, I didn't really do this, but can you give me some credit for it?" It doesn't work that way. Like, just
right.
I think that rule that we have, I hope it's going away, but it's a disservice, and it doesn't prepare students for what's next. Even if it's a job, like,
Yeah.
it doesn't, you can't go to work and be like, "Yeah, I don't feel like doing all of my work today. I'm only going to do half."
Well, I'm gonna do 50% of my work.
Yeah.
But give me credit for 8 hours, right?
Right. Can I get 8 hours? I'm going to take a 4-hour lunch, but let's pay me for 8. It's not going to work.
I have a bonus question for you, and this is kind of
Sure.
like, okay, how would you explain your job to a 6-year-old? I think would you tell a 6-year-old, if they ask you, Miss Smith, what do you do? And I'm 6, how would you explain that to me?
So I would tell them that I'm a teacher that teaches students. I don't just teach them English, I teach them how to learn in an environment where they can be around other people and feel comfortable around other people. I teach them about how to manage their own stress and anxiety and frustration, and I teach them all kinds of skills that they're going to need when they get older.
So a 6-year-old says, I'm stressed.
The
I'll
6-year-old
teach you how
says,
to manage that.
I got a fidget for you,
You,
buddy.
you got you
I
got that
got
for
you.
me. Oh my goodness. So, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate this. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your candidness, and thank you for your openness. And I very much can't wait to see you in that administrative position as a
Thank
principal,
you.
as you
Thank you.
continue
Thank you
your
so
educational
much.
journey. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.